Welcome to the Retrieving Catholicity podcast, where we think about life and ministry in light of the whole truth with the whole church for the whole world.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Retrieving Catholicity. I'm so glad you found us here on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. So some of you know this, some of you know it intuitively if you followed the journey, but my academic pursuits and my church planting journey have always been intimately connected. You know, I'm planting a church. What are we going to do when we gather? Why are we going to do those things? How are we going to reach people? How are we going to think of ourselves in relationship with other churches? Like, these questions of Catholicity really rose from a church planting journey. But I'm thinking about this not just in the context of how do you lead and oversee a church and how do you think about a church, but I'm thinking about this with like a missiological aim, a missiological goal. Like, if you're a church planter, you plant a church because you want to reach people. I don't think you should really plant a church as a church split, or I don't think it's necessarily the wisest impetus to plant a church just because you like to do church a different way, though, you know, I'm not saying that's always wrong. But I think ultimately at the heart of church planting, of being a church planter, is this missionary heart, this missionary call, this missionary desire. And so I had this missionary urge to do something, to plant a church, to reach people in Charleston, to plant a church in downtown Charleston that will be reaching all sorts of people with the gospel. And so that's the heartbeat that I had. And then as I go to seminary, it's not until about halfway through my MDiv experience that I began to think like, okay, I need to think, and I want to think more deeply about the nature of the church, the nature of her mission, in a way that's going to require more academic work, right? Early on, I just was kind of a thoughtful guy who wanted to plant a church. But I had this, and I think I've fought cynicism pretty hard over the last several years of my life, but I had this intuitive, like, dislike of the church growth movement. This podcast is not going to be about McGavern and the church growth movement as a whole. There's plenty of good resources out there on the church growth movement as a particular entity. But yet I wanted to grow the church. You know what I mean? There's so many of these things that's like, I don't want to do that, but I want to see the church grow. And in seasons of my life, if I'm going to be completely honest with you, that has led to a sense of frustration. I would just feel like I'm too thoughtful to do what these guys are doing because I think it's wrong in this way, in some way, random thing. But I want to reach people, and reaching people is the goal, right? But I don't want to get into like an ends justify the means type of thing. And so I had this almost like this difficult tension in my life of like wanting to plant the church, wanting to grow the church, and at the same time wanting to do things faithfully, do things slowly, do things the right way. And so it almost felt like these two things inside of me were almost at war with one another. I haven't resolved that war in my heart, but I have learned a little bit about myself over the years. I think, and I don't know if this is either going to sound like I'm being hard on myself or I'm patting myself on the back, so we'll let you decide. I think there are guys who excel on given paradigms. They take the unspoken and spoken rules of the game, like this is how you plant a church, and they just do it, and they do it really, really well. They gather a crowd, they raise funds, they do all these things that are immediately visible and that are able to sort of lead this church into the future. And so you have guys that excel on given paradigms. And then I think you have guys that that create new paradigms, or that ask questions about the paradigm, or that criticize the paradigm. And I found myself, again, somewhere in the middle, but more of the like, I want to be thoughtful about the paradigm, right? Like today in shorthand, I might say to someone, well, we are planting like a Word and Table Baptist church. In 2014, I wouldn't have had any idea what that meant. Like philosophically speaking, what does that mean? So my own paradigm for what it means to plant a church developed. Like, I saw these other paradigms that would result in quicker growth or quicker these things, but there was this thing in me, I don't know if it was good or bad, to be honest, that would keep me from like doing that. And so I had to like get there from first principles, right? I had to like do the biblical work and the theological work and come to this paradigm myself. So I look at resurrection now, and if you had told the 21-year-old me the story of resurrection, I don't know if I would be like thrilled with the way it went or perplexed by the way it went. I would be kind of like, interesting. I don't know if that's what I expected. And how many of our stories with God are like that? We think one thing, another thing happens, and then we're kind of, okay, this is what it is, right? In other words, we didn't just explode real fast, but we've grown steadily, but we have sort of new language to think about what we're doing, how we're doing it, and all these sorts of things. I've come to think of myself more as a paradigm builder who kind of understands some of these basic leadership skills. Then I have think of myself as some like catalytic planter who's going to get 1,000 people into a room in 5 or 6 years. That's just not me. And I gave that little introduction to sort of how I think about myself and how I think about the church growth and church planting, just to say, like, I'm going to give 7 theses on church growth in this episode that I hope will be helpful. These aren't like merely practical or merely speculative. They're just sort of 7 things that I have sort of come to believe or come to think about church growth. These are all provisional, conditional. They may change to some degree. But how many of us are in churches and we want to see them grow? There's this unspoken desire that the thing should grow. Yet that growth is slow. That growth is not linear. And how can we think about it? So I think if you're a member of a church that, you're wanting your church to grow, maybe it's not growing, maybe it is growing. You're a leader of a church, you're thinking about, well, what does growth look like for us? I do hope that something in these 7 theses, and I won't go like forever on each one, so don't be like, oh my gosh, 7 theses is going to be forever. Some will be quite quick, but I do hope something in this episode you will find helpful as you shepherd the flock of God among you, or as you live as a sheep in the flock of God among you. The first thesis is that church growth is not an accident. Church growth is not an accident. Here's what I mean. It just means something happens that triggers it. Now, to say that church growth is not an accident is not to say that we control it. In fact, I want to make a sub-thesis on this one. I think the more controllable our growth is, the less eternal it is. In other words, you can manufacture church growth. Like, that's something you can decide to do and do it. But the problem with that is I don't think that the sort of growth that comes from that action is all that impactful. But the first thesis is sort of foundational to all the others. There are reasons, some are theological, but as a theology guy, I need to be completely frank with you. Most of them are not theological. There are reasons that some churches grow and others do not, and there's reasons that they grow at the pace that they do. So this first thesis is just setting the stage for the rest of them to say that church growth is not an accident. Yes, of course, the sovereign God can do whatever he wants whenever he wants. And I have found that things can happen like on a dime. They can happen quickly. And that we're kind of looking around like, well, we didn't really do anything different here. But God is doing something in that season. So to say that everything has a reason isn't to say everything has a human reason or a controllable reason, but something causes it. So the first I would just say is church growth is not an accident. So the second thing I would say, this might be the most helpful for some of you. Church growth is contingent. Church growth is contingent. Here's what I mean. In our last membership class, every single person there had moved to Charleston, West Virginia in the last few years. In fact, the vast majority of growth in attendance and in membership has been the result of people moving to Charleston. That's good and bad news. The good news is that when people move to Charleston, they're looking for churches, and we're one of the churches they stop at, and we have a pretty good hit rate, if you want to use such crass language. However, it's also bad news for a couple of reasons. Reason one is there aren't very many people moving to Charleston, to be blunt. And the second is perhaps more painful as a pastor. The opposite is also true. The vast majority of departures have been people who move away. So when, not everyone, sometimes there could be conflict, there can be disagreements, there can be an opportunity elsewhere. There can be, I'm just not interested in this anymore. All the normal reasons that anyone leaves any church apply to our church here at Resurrection, of course. But I would say over 50% of the people who leave, that are members who leave, do so because they have moved away. In terms of our number of attendees and number of members, the number one factor as to what happens to that number is a social reality that is completely uncontrollable to us. It is just utterly contingent. So I hope this can maybe encourage some of you who are in a downward season, perhaps, that, you're not, just because something is not an action doesn't mean you're controlling all of the variables and factors. So we can pat ourselves on the back for growing, or we can shame ourselves for not growing. But the town you're in, the region you're in, the place you're in has way more to do with your church's growth than you think. Now, there are dozens of exceptions to this thesis, of course. There are dozens of things to say. Well, you can grow a church in a small town, or we just started growing at this point. Yeah, we'll get to some of those that I think might address that. But by and large, in my experience, a lot of the growth in attendance and growth in membership has been contingent on realities that are completely outside of my control, and even really outside of like theological influences. A third thesis on church growth: churches grow on social fault lines. When you shoot a 3-point in a 3-point contest, you have a rack of basketballs, and a lot of times you'll have a rainbow basketball at the end. So you shoot a ball, 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 and then there's a rainbow basketball, and that basketball is worth like 3 points. It's worth more points than the other basketballs. It's a double. You've hit the jackpot there. There are sometimes where someone who comes to your church who's kind of like that rainbow basketball. What I mean by that is they are a reacher, they are a multiplier, they are a bringer. And so sometimes you will reach somebody will come to your church, and that person is a multiplier, that person is a reacher, that person is a person who's bringing other people with them. In other words, you reach a matriarch of a family who brings her whole family and their kids' families with them, right? You reach somebody who is intentional with their friend group, and they're inviting people, and all of a sudden you've got one person who's come, and they're bringing people, who's bringing people. And so sometimes you reach those people, and sometimes it's hard to find those people. You don't know who those people are, right? That's the difference in the analogy, I guess, that you see the rainbow basketball. Well, you don't see who your multipliers and reachers are necessarily going to be. But I would just say that churches grow on social fault lines. It's that family is going to come. Those friends are going to come. The homogenous unit principle, which I so despise, right? That says basically churches grow when you get a lot of people who are very similar, and they come. The thing I hate about that is theological, but the reason it was effective, and it is effective for so many people, is because it just frankly is how humans work. And so to try to do multi-generational stuff is to push against the grain of human nature. Now, it's to go with the grain of the New Testament, the Bible, the church's nature in the Bible, but it's to push against sort of our cultural and our natural predispositions. We want to be around people who look like us, think like us, talk like us, and we want to be around people who are in a similar season of life as us. And it's a challenge to try to make it work with people who are not. And so now that I'm older and have 2, soon to be 3 children, a lot of the young families who visited our church years ago that it did not stick. Now when a young family comes, there's a much better chance that they stick because there's other young families. And so now you have to be aware of like, okay, well, maybe single people are going to be more naturally reticent to join, or they're going to feel maybe more ostracized. So how can we be aware of that? There's all sorts of ways of saying like, whatever you have the most of is what you're probably going to be most attractive to as people are looking for a church or coming to your church. So the social fault lines are sort of really the clearest way that you see people join a church. So again, thus far we've said church growth is not an accident. Something causes it. It can be something that God does, of course, or it can just be a God working through a convergence of external, theological realities like people getting jobs, people going on medical school rotations. We get lots of people coming and going for that. The age of most of the people in your church changes, and the people who visit see people who look like them, and so they're more naturally inclined to stay. Churches grow on those things. And so the fourth thesis is really helpful, I think. It's what I want to zone in on for a moment. Church growth is deceptive. Church growth is deceptive. Rising attendance is not always an indicator of health. And I'm not just being a contrarian here, as much as it might sound like it. Yes, you hear so many, well, healthy things grow. Like, yeah, healthy things grow, but so does cancer. If more people in chairs is our only metric of success, then we will be tempted to chase it at the expense of the sorts of things that God's people ultimately must be doing. Right? Instead of investing in the people God has sent us, instead of trying to mature together into the image of Christ, into the fullness of Christ, instead of trying to reach people who are far from God, instead of developing leaders, instead of connecting on mission partnerships, instead of strengthening the connective tissue within our congregation, all sorts of things we should be doing. Instead of doing those things, all we're trying to do is how can we get more people here? And you set yourself up for an ends justify the means world where not only are you acting sort of sinfully and rashly because you're just trying to do this thing that is your scorecard, but the Bible scorecard be damned, this is what your scorecard says, and this is what you think, and this is what your denomination thinks, and the people in other pastors might think, and so this is what you got to get. You're chasing that scorecard, and you're sort of ignoring the things that you really, really, really must be doing. So not only is that like sinful, but like you're missing out on the glory and the beauty of church life if you're always obsessed with how many people are going to be there next week. So at Resurrection, and we're in maybe I'd say a small season of growth, and we have been sort of since COVID. For us, like growth has happened slowly and consistently, and then the opposite has happened like instantly when we've shrunk. Like when we shrunk in early days, it's difficult early on, so you think you're going to start off good, and then something happens, and then bang, you decrease by 50%, and then you got to build up from there. And there's a season of growth, and so that's kind of like what happened in our life. Then 16, 17. 18, we get the building in 2018 here at the theater, so we begin to grow. 19, we're like, oh man, we're actually growing. And then 20, oh, we're going to be fine. Everyone is cool with each other through this. Every other church is going to struggle with COVID, not us. We're going into it good, man. Everyone's love how you're handling it. Good job. 2020, 2021, we try to start meeting. Where is everybody? There's this everything all at once kind of moment of this is not going to be just pick up where we left off. This is going to be a fundamentally different thing. So in a sense, I'm kind of thinking like a church revitalizer and church planter still in 2020, 2021, 2022, because it's how are we going to build it? So now here we are in 26. So we've got some distance and we've seen significant growth from 2021 or 2022. So all that to say, there have been moments where it's early on or then COVID where it's like, bang, half your church disappears or 30 people disappear or 50 people disappear or something like that. Could that be avoided? Sure. Is that inevitable? No. There's lots of things you could say about that. But for us, we've had our seasons of growth have been more slow. And so we're in one of those right now, and people can kind of sense that. But I want to make abundantly clear, make the case that this little season of growth is happening in part because there was a time when we were not growing. And it's what you're doing when you're not growing that is sort of setting the sails of the ship to be ready when the Spirit of God moves so that your ship goes and sort of seizes that moment. When we weren't like growing attendance wise, you had to face, okay, this isn't going to get better immediately. That's when you really have to trust not in momentum, trust not in motivation, but trust in the sovereign hand of God. Still in those days, be most faithful with the inputs. How are we structuring our church for health? What is health as the Bible defines it? How are we identifying and developing new leaders? How are we re-emphasizing the importance of meaningful membership? Why are we doing the things that we're doing on Sunday mornings? How are we making sure we're doing those things consistently? And sometimes you have to lose the thing that's not working to get what will work. You hear people say there's addition by subtraction sometimes, and that is true. When you have a lot of people or influential people who are sort of 1 foot in and 1 foot out, like, your culture is going to suffer. Everything in us wants to just be like, oh, it's okay. But face, what is it? Like, maybe someone's at fault. Maybe it's just a fit difference. Maybe it's a vision difference, whatever it is. But be in or be out, right? Like, Coach Osborne, and our basketball coach I played for and worked for several years, always said, like, you can't be a flickering light. You can't be sort of sometimes on, sometimes off, and no one knows when you're on, and no one knows when you're off. And so if you have folks who are kind of flickering lights, or who are just not sure what they're going to be doing, and they're sort of influencing other people, then your culture is going to suffer for that. So the hope is that people will keep their eyes on Jesus, figure out how to make it work, jump in and serve. But sometimes, just practically, I don't know if theologically this is good or bad, but it's just reality. Sometimes the church becomes an obstacle for people to keep their eyes on Jesus, and they either have to overcome that obstacle through extending grace or receiving grace or whatever, or they just need to find a new church where they can get their eyes on Jesus, right? Because that's the goal. Not that people would just show up at the church, but that people would see Jesus, that people would focus on him and worship him and obey him and serve him. So when it gets there for some people, how it got there, should it be there? Those are all, would have opinions on those. They'd be case by case, all sorts of things. But the reality is you have to get past that moment, right? Where are we going together? And there will be seasons where, as you articulate where you're going together, there will be people who do not want to go there, who are not going to go there. And it can break your heart. It can be difficult. But for the mission to move forward, people have to make those decisions. Unless that sound cold, I'll come back to that in a moment. Suffice to say, when I say church growth is deceptive, sometimes you can have a lot of people and be really unhealthy. Sometimes you can have a little bit of people and be really healthy. And sometimes you can have a lot of people and be not set up well to grow deeper or wider because of what you're doing, how you're doing it, and sort of all these sorts of things. So again, if you just look at the number, you just look at the figure, you just look at what you expect it to be, look at that number, know it can tell the truth, but it can also lie to you. Because if you freak out when you see a short-term dip, then you probably won't see a project through to completion. Trust the process. 5, my 5th thesis on church growth. Church growth is an outcome, not an input. Identify what matters. Identify what you want to be about. Count those things when possible. I'm not even against that. If you can count things, you should count attendance. I think it tells you something. Attendance, honestly, in my opinion, this is an opinion, not necessarily a conviction. My opinion is that attendance tells me more about how seriously our members take the gathering than how many people we're reaching who are far from God. Okay, because the number is highest when all the people who are supposed to be there by virtue of the church covenant are there. And then when we have guests and we have visitors and we have people coming and coming back and we have family from out of town and we have whatever we have, that number then sort of goes on top of that high watermark number already. And then you see really high attendance, and then you see your numbers pushing up. So attendance isn't telling me if I'm a good missionary per se. Attendance is helping me see how can I pray for and lead our church to be more serious about the gathering. But as a general rule, how many people are involved in a thing is an outcome, not an input. So be faithful in prayer, in gathering. Be faithful in reading the Bible. Be faithful in all sorts of things. Strive to do whatever you're doing. If you have several ministries or a few ministries, whatever the ministries are, with faithfulness, biblical fidelity, and excellence. Like, cultivate a culture of grace and gratitude. Develop a culture which is worth people staying in. Develop a culture of a church where, when it grows, if it grows, however it grows, is worth it and is able to be a space where people are transformed by the gospel, right? Identify and develop leaders, right? Everyone always gets to a point where they've grown and they need more leaders and they wish they'd developed them sooner. I've certainly been there. Plan and go on a mission trip. Look for gospel opportunities, right? Pray for people who are far from God. Do prayer initiatives. Do the work of ministry instead of waiting for more people to come to do it. No one's coming. Do it. And the reason you should do it is because what you're doing with 200 people and what you're doing with 400 people ultimately is the same thing. It's the same thing. And we can believe that we'll be so much more effective with more people. No, we'll just feel better about ourselves sometimes. Because you want to get those people to gaze upon God, to love the Lord, to serve the Lord, to be faithful to Him, to obey Him, to go deeper in the Word, to go out on mission. And so, like, if we're not doing that with these people, then why do we want more people outside of it being sort of a vanity project? So, in other words, be thankful for outcomes when they come, and reflect on what God has done and how this thing's all fitting together. But celebrate the inputs, celebrate the faithful acts of obedience, because that's what matters the most. That's what you'll be doing at each stage of the process. Thesis number 6 now: church growth is hard. Church growth is hard. It gets romanticized because it's good, but it's hard. Did you know not everyone wants to grow? And the reason for that is growth is a form of change. And people are resistant to change, just in general. I was at a meeting last week. I said, yeah, we've changed like this and this over the last couple of years. And I feel like we're in like a pretty good season, just trying to grow and work the plan, really. And so he said, oh, did everyone handle that well? I just didn't miss a beat. I was like, no, of course not. And he laughed, like, praise God, like, keep going. And that's because no one likes change. You come to realize that sometimes folks really want to grow, and sometimes folks want to hold on to what they have. And so you have to overcome that hurdle. You have to overcome that barrier. But what I want to say is not just like, oh, who cares about your little ministry? We want to make it bigger. No, that's not it. Here's the challenge, and here's the task. Get our eyes on Jesus. Let our desire to grow not be a vanity project on the let's grow side, and not be like, oh, we got to be as faithful as we can. Here's the people that we're going to hold on to, and these are the small ministry. I want to be a part of this thing that's here. Instead of kind of falling on either of those sides, I would just say we've got to get people's eyes on Jesus and see the church as He sees it, His beloved bride, and then see the world as He sees it, those who He loves, for whom He died. So if the glory of Christ and the importance of His mission, if these things are not the true north of our hearts and our ministries, then we will fall out of love with the church in changing seasons of her life. Because you're going to like some seasons of church life more than other seasons of church life. You're going to like your stature in some places more than your stature in other places. And so when church growth happens, you've got more people, you've got more opinions, you've got more questions, you've got more all these things. You have to make sure you're structured for this next season. You have to be faithful to the church that is, while also building the church that will be, helping people not fall in love with this future reality, but helping them love what is. And all of that's impossible if they don't love Jesus. It's impossible if they don't want to worship God and obey God and serve God. So the hardest thing about church growth is not either idolizing it or demonizing it, but it's keeping our focus in the middle of the conversation, saying, how can we keep our eyes on Jesus together? So the 6th thesis is just that church growth is hard. The 7th and final thesis, though, is that church growth is worth it. Friend, don't let cynicism win. Maybe you're one who is afraid of growth because you think it's going to bring lack of faithfulness, or you think you're compromising, you're becoming pragmatic, or whatever it is. Or maybe you're one who you desire it so much, and you wish so much that you would see week over week, month over month, year over year attendance gains at your church. Don't let cynicism win. Don't let cynicism win. No matter who you are and what you want for your church and what you want out of your church, we want to see more people get their eyes on Jesus and keep them there. We want to see more people grow in Christ and more people meet Him. That's why you plant a church. You plant a church so that you can reach people who are far from God and make disciples of them. In other words, teaching them to observe, as Jesus says, all that He has commanded, for He is with us always until the very end of the age. So celebrate those stories, celebrate those moments of faithfulness. Don't let cynicism win. We want to be evangelistically effective because Jesus has a heart for outsiders, and we want to serve the church because making disciples is growing together into the image of Christ. It's maturing together as the church. So we don't just want to get people in to sit and watch a thing, but we want people to come in and have their lives transformed. And that is an inherently slow process. That is an inherently difficult process, but it is an inherently good process. It's an inherently beautiful process. Fight, friend, this is the last thing I'll say, to keep a holy naivete. A holy naivete to believe that Jesus wants to use your church to do incredible things. Give him the freedom to define what incredible things are, right? Give him the freedom, give him all of your expectations, give him all of your fears, give him all of those things. But believe that Jesus doesn't want us to just humdrum through the mundane things of life. He wants us to be in vibrant relationship with him as we keep our eyes on him by faith, as we behold him in his word, as we gather with God's people, and as we're sent out with God's people on mission in the world, that there are many yet to be reached. There is work yet to do. And so let's take the church growth conversation. Let's demystify it a little bit. Let's talk about some of these social factors, these church structure factors, all these different factors. Let's get on the same page when we talk about a healthy church and a missional church. Let's not have these, bigger church pastors. Some of them have no idea how to talk to us guys who are below a couple hundred people. They have no idea. Like, if I can do anything for you. All right, well, just pray for us. Like, we're good. If we can do anything for you, let us know, right? And I think sometimes there's a good heart there, but it can be difficult. We come from different worlds and different churches and different ministry strategies. And I want to be one voice who's saying, listen, let's not just go all these different ways here. Let's talk about church growth theologically and practically, and let's see what God might do in our churches. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. We'd love it if you would rate, review, and send this to a friend who maybe you've talked about church growth with before and say, hey, let's listen to this. Let's watch this. What do you think about it? Thank you. Grace and peace be with you. See ya.